Well, if you have a master's degree in construction, hanging the shingles probably a safe bet, no matter where you do it.
Indeed.
Right?
It helps.
Yeah. And now, Tim, I know, for instance, Builder Magazine, a national magazine, and they have in-house writers. You have written several books on construction and issues like that, and you actually contribute to Builder Magazine. How did you reach that pinnacle of the industry?
That's been a long road. It started probably about 10 years ago. I was writing for the National Association of Home Builders, an article a week for them, and I did that for a few years, and from that came a book, and I have just kept writing and pestering Builder Magazine, and finally they weakened or something like that, and I got my foot in the door, and now I'm writing for them, and I'm really pleased about that.
Fantastic. And you also have a serious background in construction issues, correct?
Oh yes, absolutely. I have a master's degree in civil engineering, and I make my money by doing structural engineering and consulting, and I do a lot of work with Mark, doing the designs for the inspections that he does.
Sure. Now, speaking of which, so let's start with the water and drainage issues, which we have a lot of. Of course, in the summertime, it's probably not a big deal, but once the rains come, your phone probably rings off the hook.
Correct,
okay.
Yeah.
So now, drainage issues can be a huge obstacle when buying or selling a home. So what are some of the specific issues that you see when realtors call you out, for instance?
Well, that's a good question. We have a lot of issues. A lot of times they arise as a result of an inspection that was done by a general home inspection. And as a sub-note of that inspection, as they're inspecting the roof and other parts, they say, hey, there's some kind of a drainage issue. There's water staining in the foundation, there's standing water, there's damp soils, there's issues related to that. Some that most people would see prevalent in this area are cupped hardwood flooring, where they actually they change shape. The hardwood floor in their home resembles kind of a potato chip if there's a lot of water under the floor, and that's a good indicator too.
Okay.
So it's something like that.
Okay. Now, in terms of the seepage through the slabs, we have a lot of slab floors here, Tim, and I know so we can have standing water in a crawl space, or we can have water issues coming through a slab floor.
Pretty common, you bet.
Okay. So now, in terms of the soil, we have spoken before about the different types of soil that play a major role.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate?
Oh yeah, you bet. This area of the world has a lot of clay soil, and drainage problems are always worse in areas with a lot of clay, and that's because clay acts like a sponge. Mm-hmm. When the water hits it, whether it's from just the rain or from a downspout or from a property uphill from you that comes onto your property, however that soil gets wet, it absorbs the water, and if it's clay, it holds that water for a long time. Instead of the water going down vertically through the soil, it migrates sideways, and it's always looking to go downhill, and a lot of times it will find its way to a foundation wall. If there's a crack in the foundation wall, it will build up pressure behind that wall and will seep in. That could be into a crawl space, that could be into a basement. That's real common. Mark and I address that all the time. And then sometimes we'll find a house that has, say, a garage slab that's in a low area, and there's a sloping hill up gradient of that, and the groundwater comes down and it hits the walls of that garage, and it actually goes under the slab, and if there's a crack in the slab, it will bubble right on up through and wet the slab.
Okay. Now sometimes, for instance, in the crawl space or in the basement, you could see it's almost like it was high tide. There's a residue of water that was, that's where the home inspectors...
We get called out for similar issues to that. You get basements, parking garages, and we've worked on everything from the California state government buildings in downtown Sacramento to your common homeowner with a cellar.
Okay, so now sometimes you can't see standing water in the crawl space, but that doesn't mean that water's not a problem, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
It could still be.
You get all kinds of situations, but typically it's something happens, a storm hits, you have water. What people call us out for, though, is typically when they're concerned of buying a home or a building, and they want to make sure that water's not an issue. And I think we really should address Why is drainage an issue? You know, why does that get the professional realtors looking at those kind of issues and cause concern for them and their buyers?
Right.
And in that situation, what we're looking for is, what is the water doing? Is it an issue or not? And that's where we come in and figure that out.
Because you had mentioned before that the home inspector, and the home inspector also referred to as a property inspector or whole house inspection, they call it back east, that's heating, plumbing, electrical, foundation.
Right.
And they're smart enough to say, boy, this is my area of expertise, you better see a foundation expert or drainage expert.
Yeah, they'll typically refer that out to the appropriate tradesperson or professional engineer for that matter.
Now, for consumer protection, Tim, it's very common that a realtor says, you don't need that. You should never mind about that. And
Never mind the inspection?
Never mind a further inspection from an appropriate expert, for instance, foundation or drainage or structural.
Yeah, that's like saying to a doctor, well, I've got this ailment and you're telling me it's this and I don't believe it's that. And the doctor telling you, well, don't bother with the second opinion because I'm right and I'm always right.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And we all know that second opinions a lot of times are very valuable, and it's the same thing in the construction industry. If you have a problem, drainage is a great example because you can't see a lot of times where this water is coming from, and it's almost an art. You have to understand soils, you have to understand construction to be able to troubleshoot where it's coming from before you can even begin to determine what you're going to do to fix it.
So the buyers and sellers in the real estate community, Mark, they should pay attention when the termite inspector or the pest inspection or the home inspector says, boy, I think there's an issue there, because they do 2 or 3 inspections a day. If they feel that there's an issue there, and you better go to an appropriate professional, you should take their advice.
And the last time we did a show, that was one of the main thrusts of our conversation, was that, you know, do you need to get further information? And it's a no-brainer. Absolutely you do. Not only do you need to get that information, you need to get the information is specific to your situation with somebody who knows what they're doing.
Okay, now Tim, in terms of remedies, this is one of the things, say if it's, oftentimes this might be in the middle of a sale, and I've been on a sale where it was spring and there was water under one corner. So we did some investigation, it was overwatering, but let's just say, well, for instance, what are some of the ways to get rid of water in a crawl space, for instance?
Well, you mentioned overwatering. Sometimes that's not any more a problem than just turning off the sprinkler, and then that fixes the problem. And if it's in the middle of summer and there's water in the crawl space, that's one of the first things that a person like Mark or myself would investigate. Is this just a maintenance issue? It could be a broken pipe. That could be as simple as that. But if it is truly a groundwater situation where groundwater is migrating, hitting a foundation wall, finding a crack and going through it, or coming up underneath, that's a different deal. And probably that issue is going to come every single wet season. Sometimes it's there year-round. And the only way to correct that is to get rid of the water. And you either intercept it outside of the house,
right? Okay.
Or there are sometimes you can actually get it in the crawl space and intercept it there, and then pipe it or pump it out.
Now, so for instance, it might not to be alarmed. For instance, on a job that I had, the home inspector came out from the crawl space in the hall closet, right? And he was covered with mud.
Oh yeah.
And it's spring or summer.
That's a pretty good indicator.
That it's,
and you know, one of the things too, a lot of people say, well, it's just a leaky irrigation valve or something like that. Well, during the wintertime when we have 15, 20, 25 inches of rain, it's not just a leaky irrigation valve. It's going to be way worse during the winter. And a lot of times people will try to justify that during a real estate transaction and say, well, don't worry about that water. It's just an irrigation issue. Well, the reason why we're concerned about water in a crawl space is because when you get it down there, it can cause, it doesn't every time, and a lot of older homes don't have any issues with it, but it can cause serious issues with settlement, foundation settlement, especially if it's an older home on the soil that's poor and over the years it's settled down. And you've seen that where you have a lot of sloping floors. But you also have a lot of issues with wood can't resist long-term exposure to high relative humidity, and neither can the ferrous metal building fasteners, all the stuff that holds it together.
Now, for instance, one neighborhood that I visited, the homes, it was a luxury community and they were carved into the hillside.
Terraced, yeah.
and each street, there'd be a street, another row of houses, and then a street. And this was in spring, and we had heard there's a water issue, and we went to some of the other homes for sale and opened up the crawl space, and sure enough, there was standing water in a lot of these homes. And
You'll
it's still
see
spring.
standing water, you'll see running water coming through. I
Wow.
mean, we've seen actual creeks and rivers under a house.
Wow.
That's not that uncommon, especially in the type of subdivision you're talking about, that it's terraced into a hillside. All that water from up the hill, when it rains, is going to go downhill. And if it hits a house, it's going to go through or under or around that house. And as it comes down, that water is added to by the downspouts of the houses that it hits. And by the time it gets to the bottom, it can be a lot of water.
Okay, now this is in terms of the home inspections that I've attended and the seminars put on by these individuals. They also talk about the downspouts for decades have been dumping hundreds of gallons of water next to the house. Season after season, might be four corners of the house. And that's why oftentimes that corner of the house, as you mentioned earlier in the program, the clay soil swells up, goes down in summer, back and forth.
That's right.
So that's another issue, an easy one for homeowners to get that water away from the house. Mark?
Oh, yeah. You know, we see that a lot, and a lot of times it's as simple just relocating a downspout from the wrong location. A bigger issue that you're touching on, though, is when you have soil expansion and contraction, this high clay content soil we're talking about. That soil, when it expands and contracts, actually settles a tiny bit. And it's not a big deal if it's a 1/16 of an inch, but over 30 years or 20 years,
Right.
now you're talking about over an inch, 2 inches of settlement, which then can be an issue.
Okay.
A small amount of settlement is pretty typical. More than that is where we start to see issues.
Okay, so there was, for instance, if there was an Eichler, a slab floor home, or knockoff of an Eichler and a slab floor, and those downspouts have been there for decades, that one corner, especially I've seen it in the field as a realtor with the fireplace, which is a couple of tons, that corner of the house is a
Down.
full 4 inches.
Yep.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what Mark touched on right there, the nature of clay is like a sponge, but it's like a long-term sponge. It takes many years and decades for water to leave it. And near a fireplace, that's the heaviest part of a house. If there's saturated clay under it, in time, that clay is slowly going to lose water, and as it loses water, it's like a sponge that dries out. It's going to get smaller and smaller, and it's going to create what we call in the industry differential settlement. More settlement at the fireplace, which is very heavy, than, say, at the front door or at the garage, which are very light.
Now, in terms of repairs for that, Mark, whether it's a slab floor or a regular house, in terms of the cost, that could run in tens of thousands of
Oh
dollars.
yeah, that's always the first concern. Usually, when we come into a real estate transaction, especially if there's a contingency period, is what's the cost and what's my potential risk here buying a home with this issue. So the first thing you need to know is what we touched on earlier: is you don't need to panic if you have a little bit of settlement and there's no issue with that, because it's pretty common. It's when you have differential settlement that is excessive, and we use the measure in the industry of 1 inch and 20 feet laterally. If you have that amount or less, you're within normal tolerance. If you have over that, then you need to look for areas of potential damage. And so that's where you get into that cost, and yes, it can be thousands and thousands of dollars.
Okay. What about in terms of other repairs that we were speaking about? Standing water, it's the houses in the suburbs. And by the way, in the suburbs, we often have the block is split in half. One street, let's say Lewiston Drive, is 2 feet higher than Nisqually Drive. And there's a the fence in the back stands 3 feet tall, and then there's this type of retaining wall sometimes. Sometimes that causes an issue.
Well, we see that all the time. In fact, that's more the norm than the exception in this part of the world, where we have a lot of hillsides. As you terrace your way down that hill, you cut in to make a slab to put a house on or a road. Well, that leaves a vertical wall of dirt before the hill starts again, and it's just geometry that it has to work out that way. And those walls are almost never built correctly, especially if they're built out of wood. Wood rots. it's very wet with the water coming down the hill, and in time they're going to fail.
Okay. By the way, in terms of the systems, I want to go back to that one story that I mentioned where the home inspector came out of the house and he was covered with mud. In our case, it turned out to be overwatering. But during that time, we went to look at other homes for sale that are cut into the mountain. And there's 2 or 3 that had standing water, a lot of water. And then one house for sale did not have any water, as dry as a bone. And the fellow was working at home. I said, sir, I told him what was going on. He said, why do you want to look in our crawl space? I told him the story, and he said, well, I'm an appraiser. I read the reports, and I knew that there'd be a drainage issue. So he brought in 5 or 6 yards of gravel, had French drains. He had all people like you had done the design to get the water away from his house.
And that's what you have to do. The ideal case is that you do that when the house is built.
Exactly.
But these older houses, that wasn't done. And so they get the water in the crawl space and they get the water coming up through the slab. And if you want to get rid of the water, you have to get rid of it and you have to intercept it on the uphill side and pipe it around.
Okay.
Or if you're in the bottom of a valley and everything drains down to you and you have a water problem, there is no downhill relative to where your house is.
Sure.
You still have to dig down, collect the water, and now you have to pump it someplace.
Pump it back. Okay, when you visited my house, you were speaking about pumps and that those pump systems, eventually there's moving parts or mechanical, they will fail at a certain time, so you have to maintain them. You just can't leave them alone, which I see in real estate all the time. They put a pump in there and walk away, right?
Yeah.
But I want to get back, when you're called, in a real estate transaction, we have what's called contingencies. I will buy your house contingent upon my inspectors going through the homes. And then that might be a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. And if the home inspector says, oh, you have a drainage issue here, I suggest you talk to somebody like the Garrison brothers. Then we have to place a phone call to your company and wait for you're busy, so you have to come out. So the days are clicking away. Then you have to prepare an estimate. So during that time frame, the seller's sitting on pins and needles. The buyer wants to know what the cost is. So it's really, that's how it plays out in a real estate transaction.
Yeah.
Right.
And
But
then,
the good, a lot of times too, when we're there on the site, myself or one of our engineers will tell the buyer, the realtor, everybody involved, what the summary is verbally.
good.
And then that way we can let them know right out of the gate what they're looking at on cost and whatnot.
And so coming to a conclusion to what your report will probably look like and that the sky is not falling.
Right.
Okay.
Which is most of the time.
Now, by the way, in terms of those systems, well, let's say you had a mechanical system, the backyard is a bit of a valley.
Yeah,
and
or
you-
even a flat area,
flat
such
area.
as your house. It's flat. And maybe there's no storm drainage system out in the street that's lower than your house. It's the same idea. When you collect that water, it has to go someplace. So it can be a flat area.
Now, in terms of, I know Mark was at my house years ago, and one solution, because of the second building, the garage that's in the back of the property, with the roof and the gutters, that I could have a pump back there sending it back. So when you put the pump into a drainage area, in terms of maintenance, there's different styles, right? One could be completely submerged in water, and one does. It's just
Yeah, but typically what we're talking about on maintenance is when we install a system, it's just a standard, and most manufacturers have a warranty on their material or their product and their pumps and such. If we don't install it correctly, if it's not installed by an approved installer who's a professional, that's a big one, and you just touched on that. I've probably inspected minimally 7,500 homes and at least 1,000 plus commercial buildings,
Wow.
schools, hospitals, at least, and I'm probably being conservative. I bet you I have not seen more than 10 properly installed sump pumps in the residential sector.
Wow.
When you get into commercial, industrial, and municipal, that's much different, because everything there is designed and installed under engineering guidelines. In the residential sector, they call a handyman who comes out there and does his best. And he usually puts in the cheapest pump he can pull off the shelf at the local hardware store, and he installs it incorrectly, and within 2-3 years, it's shut down permanently. And then they say, well, I put one in 5 years ago, but it hasn't worked for 2 or 3.
Sure. Now, also, we had mentioned before when you stopped by my house, you sometimes, one issue can be a can of worms if other professionals, quote unquote, have worked on the property, and now you try and come in there and fix what they started. That could...
Yeah, that's, I think that's pretty common, especially in the residential sector,
Right.
where anybody can install these things, and any mechanical system is going to fail sooner or later. It's not if, it's when. And if something fails here, it can have a ripple effect over there, and generally it does. Like with drainage, if suddenly this pump stops working, well, the water's still going to come in, and it's going to go someplace. It's going to go to the lowest spot, and maybe the lowest spot is to overflow the top of the little chamber that the pump is in. And now where's it going to go if it keeps coming? So yes, it can have all sorts of ripple effects.
Now, in terms of the water, Mark, we have here, we're close to the bay, we're an earthquake country. I would imagine you also think about the seismic ramifications. If you're in a crawl space, especially the older homes, you mentioned, the two of you mentioned on my home, that the homes that were built in the 20s or 30s, they have some issues there in case of a good earthquake. And so drainage doesn't help.
No,
Or
it doesn't,
drainage.
and it's all combined in what any competent, good inspection or engineering firm is going to be looking for, and to a buyer, that's one of the big safeguards that they want. Is my family going to be safe in this new home that we're purchasing, and what is the evaluation of it? And you're touching on a big subject. We are in the Bay Area, which is definitely earthquake country. In addition to that, we're in an area that the drainage is typically poor. And in addition to that, there are a lot of older homes that have had either zero or very little maintenance and or upgrade done to them to make them meet current building code so that they can resist seismic earthquake events better.
Okay.
So you get a combined event there where you get seismic in an older home without those protections. There's no guarantee, no nothing. You just don't know.
And in fact, in the '89 Loma Prieta earthquake, the areas that got hammered the worst were the wet, low areas where the soil under the houses was basically wet soup, oatmeal, that's how I call it. But that type of soil, if it's supporting a structure, when the earth shakes, that's the kind of stuff that can turn to jelly. That's called liquefaction, and buildings can come down.
Right.
Right. So drainage, yeah, it can cause problems, mold problems and rust problems in the crawl space and cupping of your hardwood floors, but it can also be a significant structural hazard in an earthquake.
Now you still have, when you install these drainage systems or try and do a retrofit, I would imagine you still need a permit on something like that?
Yeah, that's a good topic probably for another one of your shows. We're going to
Right.
get into the permit issues. But whenever you're dealing with anything that's health, life, and safety, so that'd be electrical, plumbing, gas lines, anything like that, structural, then you are required, without a doubt, to pull a permit. And most of the time, most jurisdictions, your local building department, whether it be county or city or town, are going to require that design to be done by a competent, licensed professional engineer, like my brother Tim. It's going to have to be submitted and reviewed to make sure that it meets that building code, and then the installation has to be done by a competent professional that is licensed in the state of California to do so.
Okay. In terms of the time frames when you do something like that, by the way, we always recommend on this program that the buyer has a full set of inspections, even though the seller might have had a full set of inspections. In your industry, if you wanted somebody just to come out on a house in the suburbs and do an inspection, is there a wide range of cost, whether it's a 2-story or 1-story, or built in the 20s versus built in the 70s?
No, the cost is pretty much the same. We charge per the size, simply because the bigger the home, the more work it is for us to crawl underneath the crawl space, measure it out, do an as-built sketch of the existing structural elements so that we know what the thing is made of. So the cost is relative to the size. If the home, for example, is over 3,000 square feet, then we charge more money than a home that's under 1,500 square feet.
Got it,
So-
okay. Now, in terms of, in the medical profession, they have what's called mandatory reporting. If a senior has medication for dementia, then they have to tell the Department of Motor Vehicles. Is there something like that in construction where if you see a real, with the health and safety issue that you spoke about, you're called out for foundation or drainage, but you see these other fire hazards or something, do you have to report that?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's just fiduciary requirement or obligation as far as I see it. As far as a legal requirement of that, I
Well,
don't know.
You would just mention it to the principal that hired
Well,
you?
I can tell you this, that to become a registered engineer in this state, you have to take an ethics exam, which is part of the examination process. It's a 2-hour exam. And in that, you are bound, you learn that by law, you're bound as a licensed professional that if you're on a job and you see something, you have to, by law,
Got it.
bring it up and report it.
Okay.
You bet.
We had the Garrison brothers here, Tim and Mark Garrison. Can you two stick around, do another program?
Love to, you bet.
We'll do one on permits.
You
Yes.
bet.
That's a hot topic. Thanks again for watching Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena.